The moment usually arrives mid-transaction. The card reader chirps, the screen swivels toward you, and three large numbers appear like options on a game show. 18, 20, 25. Someone behind you shifts their weight. The cashier looks anywhere but at your face. It's quick, clean, and oddly loud for something that's supposed to be optional. It doesn't feel aggressive. It feels efficient. That's part of why it works. There's no argument, no explanation, just a quiet assumption that one of those buttons will be pressed. The moment passes quickly, but the sensation lingers longer than the receipt in your hand afterward. This didn't come from etiquette or a sudden cultural shift. It came from software. Payment systems replaced older terminals, and with them came standardized prompts designed to simplify checkout. Simplicity, in this case, meant suggesting numbers instead of leaving a blank space to consider. A few years ago, tipping was something you initiated after service ended. You reached for cash, or you wrote a number on a receipt while reflecting briefly on the experience. Now the system initiates the request before you've even taken a sip or a bite. The prompt arrives early, framed brightly, and presented as the natural next step. Timing matters, framing matters. When the question comes before the experience, the logic quietly shifts. You're no longer responding to service. You're responding to a screen that expects closure. It feels new because it's visible and consistent, but it didn't start as a social experiment. It started as a payments upgrade. Small businesses adopted tablets because they were cheaper, faster, and easier to manage than older equipment behind the counter. The companies that built those systems needed defaults. They chose numbers that looked generous, reasonable, and socially acceptable. They didn't invent tipping pressure, they standardized it. Once standardized, it began to feel official, even when nothing about the law or custom changed. The result is a ritual that looks authoritative in places where tipping was never customary. Counter service, self-serve kiosks, a bottle pulled from a fridge. The interface doesn't understand context. It only understands that the transaction reached its final step. What adds the edge is the choreography. The screen turns outward. The buttons are large and centered. The line is close enough to feel present. Declining requires action, not silence. You're asked to choose, and choosing feels like a public act, even when no one comments. None of this means tipping is wrong. In the US, tipping remains a meaningful part of income for many service workers, especially in full-service restaurants and bars. That hasn't changed. What has changed is frequency and timing, which now arrive before judgment can form. That mismatch creates discomfort, not stinginess, confusion. When every transaction looks the same, context disappears. People guess. Guessing leads to over-tipping where it was never expected and quiet resentment where it still matters deeply and carries real weight. So this is the frame going forward. We're separating custom from interface. We'll look at where tipping still matters, where service fees change the math, and how these screens are built to move you along. No guilt, no lectures. Just a clear translation, so the choice is yours again. Once you notice the pressure, the next step is understanding the rules underneath it. Because there actually are rules. They just aren't announced by the screen. In the United States, tipping customs still depend on the type of service, even if the interface pretends everything is the same. Table service at a restaurant still carries expectations. A bartender mixing drinks does too. Haircuts, taxis, hotel housekeeping follow long-standing customs. None of that vanished when tablets showed up. The norms stayed put, even as the hardware and checkout rituals changed around them. Where things get fuzzy is counter service and self-serve. Coffee ordered at a register, takeout lifted from a shelf, a muffin passed across a counter. Historically, Tipping here was optional, modest, or non-existent, acknowledged quietly rather than requested directly. A tip jar sat nearby with loose change and a few bills. You noticed it if you wanted to. You ignored it if you didn't. The jar didn't interrupt the transaction. It didn't ask a question. It waited patiently and accepted whatever happened next without commentary. The tablet does ask, not because it's rude, but because it's designed to finish transactions efficiently. Systems like Square and Toast reduce friction by limiting choices. 3 buttons, big numbers, clean design. 18, 20, 25% appears helpful and orderly. That order anchors decisions. It suggests normal before thought arrives. That's the nudge, not a demand, not a rule. Behavioral design has known this for decades. People choose middle options, presets feel official. Searching for custom or no tip adds friction when a line waits. The software isn't judging you, it's predicting behavior. Service fees add another layer of confusion. A service charge is mandatory. It goes to the business, not directly to workers unless clearly stated. A tip line remains optional, even when it appears right afterward. The screen rarely explains that difference well. Many people don't feel comfortable asking. That discomfort fills the gap. Timing makes it stranger. The prompt often appears before service is complete, sometimes before it even begins, which quietly shifts the logic of why you're tipping at all. You're no longer responding to service quality, you're responding to a moment. That's why it feels off, even when the amount itself doesn't seem extreme. The sequence matters as much as the number. Context disappears, and the brain looks for cues wherever it can. What helps is separating the human from the hardware. The person behind the counter usually didn't choose the defaults or design the flow. They're often aware of the awkwardness too. The tablet isn't their voice. It's simply the system processing payments. So the practical translation is straightforward. Table service still carries customary percentages. Counter service and self-serve remain optional. Service charges are mandatory, tips are not. Preset buttons are suggestions, not obligations. Custom amounts and no-tip options exist deliberately. Once the structure is visible, the pressure eases. The tablet stops feeling like a referee and becomes what it is: software finishing a task. You can pause, choose deliberately, smile, tap what fits the situation, and move on without guilt or explanation. At some point, it helps to flip the story around. The world didn't suddenly become more aggressive about tipping. The interfaces just got smoother. We've lived through this pattern before. Dial-up modems screamed, ATMs beeped. Self-checkout accused us. Systems changed faster than habits. None of that meant we were failing. It meant the systems changed faster than our habits did. The same thing is happening here. The tablet feels pushy because it's confident. Confidence reads as authority even when there isn't any, and that illusion does real work. A bright screen, centered buttons, clean design, and a person waiting nearby combine into a moment that feels bigger than it is. Once you see that choreography, the pressure shrinks. It goes from a judgment to a prompt, and prompts are optional by definition. One useful move is separating generosity from reflex. Tipping fairly doesn't require speed. It requires context. Table service is still table service. Orders taken, drinks refilled, plates cleared, timing managed. Percentages make sense there because the labor is continuous and visible. Counter service is different. Self-serve is different. In those situations, pausing is allowed. Using custom isn't rude. Tapping no tip isn't a protest. You're matching the response to the service. The software doesn't mind, and the business already got paid. The person behind the counter usually didn't choose the defaults and isn't tracking your decision. They're focused on the next order. That alone removes much of the imagined audience. Most of the pressure lives in the design, not in the people nearby. It also helps to remember that service fees are not tips. A service charge is mandatory and goes to the business unless stated otherwise. A tip line remains optional, even when it appears immediately afterward. One glance at the receipt saves a surprising amount of guilt. If words help settle nerves, simple ones work. I'm good, thanks. I'll do custom. No tip today. These aren't confrontational. They're transactional. You don't owe an explanation, and you're not being graded. The urge to justify is part of the interface. What's really happening is a quiet test of identity. Am I generous? Am I cheap? Am I out of touch? The screen invites you to answer all of that in seconds. You don't have to. Identity isn't decided by a checkout prompt or a preset percentage. There's also a social mask at work. Many people tip quickly to end the moment. Relief is powerful, but it fades fast. Irritation lasts longer. A choice that fits the situation feels calm afterward. Calm is the better signal, and it doesn't rush. Over time, the right device disappears into the background. The same happens here once the screen stops defining the moment. It becomes a tool again. You walk up, pay, choose deliberately, and move on. No performance, no internal commentary required. The quiet win isn't paying less or more. It's walking away settled, not defensive, not triumphant, just clear. The screen flips back, the line moves, life continues. And next time it happens, it feels smaller because you know the game.